I'm Yuriko. What's up? And I recently just watched a video that was like, it was on Spanish, teaching you Spanish, because I live in Spain, and it was answering questions about Spain in Spanish. And I thought, kind of a cool concept. So I'm going to do composer searches Google for composer questions. However, there aren't that many composer questions. So a lot of the time Google thought I was actually just saying compositing. It thought I was saying compositing questions. So some of these don't make the most sense, but I'm still going to answer them the best that I can. So question 1 is how to start composing. So I'm going to assume that this is something that someone's got a bit of writer's block. They're not really sure exactly what direction they want to take it in. So I've got a couple few ways here. The first one is search up a chord progression. It's nice and simple. If you just search on the internet, X chord progression, it can be a feeling. You can search, sad, happy, angry, or you can search anime, blockbuster film, horror, whatever. You can search anything you want, add chord progression, and there's going to be a huge list of them. You can't copyright chord progression, but people have tried. So it's not like there's anyone's going to copyright you for taking the same chord progression, and you can do creative things with this chord progression anyway. It's not like you have to take this chord progression and keep it, but you can take this chord progression, put it in there, and then ideas should start flowing. If they don't start flowing, however, a couple other things you can think of is you can make them chords into an arpeggio. Sometimes you can use actually like an ARP with some kind of machine that does the arpeggiating for you, or you can just sort of do an arpeggio yourself. Just take those and just sort of do something. Put some kind of rhythmic ostinato in there. And a lot of the times that can even sort of point out a melody that you're like, oh, that's kind of cool. And then you take that and go with it. If that doesn't work, you can also use a drum, same sort of thing. Search up a drum beat. It can be on an actual drum kit, or it can be some Latin groove, or some cinematic sort of standard thing. It doesn't matter. The point is, these patterns and chord progressions, they're not copyrightable because everyone's done them 100 times over. That if they copyrighted them, music would go from like infinite possibilities to like none, basically. So again, it's a good way to really inspire you to doing something. And in a similar sense to loops, which again, always a good way to start if you really can't. I don't really use loops myself, but if that gives you inspiration, go for it. I just suggest starting with some loop, doing some things around it, taking the loop out, and then continuing with the completely original piece that you've got. And same thing can be done with these drum beats and chords and stuff. If once you get something going, you want to take them out and do a different thing, go for it. You've at least started. All right, so here we are. I've just opened up a track. It's all it's got on it is just one drums just doing this. So there's a bit of an accent on the one of every one of every four. And I think that's just a round robins thing. But what I'm trying to show you is if we take this and we just put velocity down a little bit. And then we're just going to pick certain ones. I'm just going to accent those. And now we just have some completely random, unique rhythm. So I might even just, okay, so here we've got, and now if I just take that, and we just do another one, we'll do another 8-bar one. There we go. We can do it again. So let's this time put one on the first, and here, and then these two, and those three, and that one, and that one, and then that one there. Again, we're just literally just picking random ones.
Yeah, so you can see here how I've just made two very distinct things that I don't know about you, but when I hear that, automatically I've got some ideas going on because I've got that rhythmic pulse. It kind of just gives your mind even those two together sound really cool because this one's a bit more even, a bit more straight to what you expect it to be, and this one's quite off. But yeah, anyway, point is, there it is.
Another way is to make a bad melody. If you're thinking, God, I can't really get this melody working, it doesn't matter. Do a bad melody, and then come back and change the melody later. But if you've got a melody there, you can write everything else around it and then take the melody out, and you've got a fully fledged piece that all it needs is one melody. And you can sleep on it, come back the next day, and you've already got a full piece that all you have to do is add in a melody. And the final thing that actually inspires me a lot is imagine that there's a player there. If you're imagining, think of if you can't start, so you pick an instrument, you go piano. What's a piano player going to do? A very different thing to what an oboe player is going to do, or a cello player, or a guitar player. So just doing that creates restrictions, and restrictions are always great for this. But doing that creates restrictions, and restrictions enable creativity. But yeah, a great way is, think of a piano player. So a piano player is going to kind of do something like this, which means, okay, well, what am I doing? I'm going up now. Oh, and then this hand's going up here, and maybe it wants to go down there or something. And I'm literally visualizing this, and then I turn it into a composition. The best example of this is this track. I forget what it's called. I did it for a feature, not a feature film, a web series, and when I made that track, I was literally just sitting there, filming myself doing this, and I was like, I was gonna do this, and I even did that one. I was like, this hand goes down, and that one goes up there, and then, and you can hear this stuff as it's going on, and it sounds like an actual piano player because I'm imagining what a piano player would do. And you can do this for any instrument. You can go a cello and imagine what the cello would go up here and then come down. And just by picturing that and sort of making that into something, you can make a piece. Another example that I did, this song from my band Satyas. When I was doing that, I was like, oh, he's going to do a little shred part, and then he's going to go back down here, and he's going to jump up to there, and then I literally just worked out what works in that situation, right? I was visualizing what a band would do, and then I made it. So a couple different ways to start. This one, how to persuade in composition or whatever. I don't, again, remember exactly where this one came from. But the point that I'm trying to say is, I don't really know what persuading means here, but I think it's like, so it's going to leave it up to interpretation. And that is how to convince someone of something. So I think the best way is, it doesn't have to be accurate. If you're trying to make a piece from the Dark Ages, it doesn't actually have to have the music that they were playing in 500 AD, right? If you're doing music from the Baroque period, maybe some people will notice, sure, but it's still going to give that feeling of back in time. If you're out in the desert in Morocco, you can use the Phrygian scale. It doesn't mean that you have to use whatever scale they actually used. I don't know, because it doesn't matter. And I guarantee you that if you were using stuff from back then, it's not going to have the same effect as if you just used something that people actually associate with that. So that's about it, right? If you think of anything, if you think of like a Russian piece, like they go to Russia, you're going to do something that sounds a bit Russian, right? I'm going to use whatever, some kind of scale, Aeolian dominant or something, I think. But that one actually, that was one that they used, I suppose. But it's not the only scale that they used. And if you look at a lot of Russian music, it doesn't sound like that. It just sounds like normal music. But if you played normal music, even if you played an original Russian piece that's like super prominent in Russia, to a Western audience, they're not going to know that. So it's not going to make them, what was the word I used? It's not going to persuade them into thinking that they're in Russia. So being realistic is great sometimes, but do not die by that sword. Do not die on that hill. Okay, how to get better at composing. This one is simple. It's do one new thing every single time you write. Now, these new things can come from, you listening to a track and going, wow, that's really interesting tone color that I've got there. What is it? That's a flute, a violin, and a harp. Actually, a busted combo. Shit's fucking awesome. Or it could be some kind of technique that they do with, I don't know, arpeggiated woodwinds or brass, whatever. It could even be a tech thing where you go, whoa, he's actually sending the reverb to a different channel and then putting distortion on it, or something like this, right? And these are, if you listen to a track and you go, that's cool, try and pick just one of them. Don't pick all of them, just pick one of them, and in some way, even if it's a tiny way, put that in there. Even if you go, yeah, you know, like legally it's in there, but anyone watching would be like, I couldn't hear that, you know. It doesn't matter. The point is that you do it, and then when it does actually need to be there, you've thought about it and it's in there. The other thing is just experiment. If you're listening to tracks and nothing stands out, just experiment. Be like, I'm going to put a delay on a trumpet. I'm going to do it. It doesn't matter what piece you're doing. I'm sure you can find a way to do that that's going to be creative and it's going to fit. Again, it doesn't have to be the feature of the track, but just by thinking about this and adding it in there, it gives you enough that when you do need to use it, or it strikes ideas. And the point is, if this is your composing toolbox, by doing that, you're expanding it to here. It doesn't mean you're going to use this like you might only use that 99% of the time, but you at least have this stuff available, or whatever that stuff too, but stuff outside. But it's just try new stuff. It doesn't matter if it doesn't work, and it doesn't have to be the feature. Try new things. The next one is composing tools. This one was one where the computer thought I was writing compositing, and that was what came up, compositing tools. But yeah, so I figured there's two ways we could think about this. One is literal tools, things like plugins or like reverbs and distortions and whatever. The other is tools that help you to compose, you know, websites that make chord progressions for you, ones that even make melodies for you, or things like arpeggiators or the logical editor. You know, there's those that I think could be a whole video in itself. So instead I'm going to answer what are a composer's tools, and those are chord progressions, scales, and instrumentations. I think if you're thinking, you know, I don't have enough to write something, learn a new one of those. They open the world that, yeah, okay, you could include rhythms as well, or ostinatos or something. But I think as a vague sort of answer, I would say it's scales, chord progressions, and instrumentation. How long does composing take? Obviously, this one's an easy answer. It depends. On average, my compositions take less than a week of working on them, maybe like 4 days, 3 days from start to finish. They're quite big compositions. They often use like 50 instruments, like symphonic sized with some extra stuff in there too, and that includes the mixing. But of course, if you're writing something for just piano, it's going to take much less time, or like, you know, than if you're writing for a whatever. So I would say at most, if you're a good composer, 2 weeks on one track is probably far too long. I mean, don't get me wrong, you could spend a lifetime working on one track. But I think on the average, as a film game composer, 2 weeks is probably the absolute max you would spend on a track. But again, could be longer or less, depends how much time you work on it, and obviously how big it is. And then I'd say like the smallest is like 1 hour, I think. If you're doing like something with sound fonts, so not actual instruments, like 8-bit music or like Legend of Zelda music or something like that, it's going to take a lot less time because the mixing isn't really important. Everything's basically mixed, or it's a matter of just turning down. But if you're writing for actual instruments, it's going to take a bit more time because you need to actually compose for those instruments. You need to say, no, a violin would not sound like this. It's too loud, or it's, it jumps up in volume. That's weird. But that's fine if it's a virtual instrument, like a literal virtual instrument, not like, you get me. And the final one is, this one actually was about composing. It said, what are the 4 things you need to think about what 4 things should you consider before composing any piece? I was like, 4 is a weird number, but that's what the question asks. So that's what I'm going to answer. So I think the first one is, why are you composing? Is it for a game? Is it for a film? Is it just for fun? Is it for your portfolio? Why are you doing it? And I think that asks a lot more questions. If it's for a game, okay, well, what is the point of the game? What is the style? Is it a horror game? Is it a fantasy game? Is it a, I don't know, visual novel or whatever, And then you've got to go, well, okay, it's a fantasy game set in the desert. Okay, now we need to pick some instruments that resemble the desert. So that answers the instrumentation part of things, and the style and the scales and chords, and it answers a lot of questions there itself. You don't have to stick with that. You obviously don't have to say, I'm in a desert, so I have to use the Phrygian scale or whatever. That's not important, but it is the thing to think about before you start, that if you go into this writing for even if you wrote like a dramatic love song piece, right? And the score was for a dramatic love song piece in the future, right? Yeah, it would probably still fit, but it wouldn't have the edge of someone who's going, it's a futuristic film. I'm going to incorporate that into my love song piece. Number 2 is logistics. So the first one is like, if it's for a film or a game, and you've got a budget, can you actually pay for what you're trying to do? And if you can't, obviously don't do it. It's just going to bite you. The other thing is, maybe it's not for that, or maybe you don't need a full orchestra or something, but you're doing a piece on, and one character is displayed by the violin, the other character is displayed by the tin whistle, right? Maybe you've got a really good violin plugin that can emulate an actual violin well, but you don't have a great tin wind puzzle plugin. So you're like, I need to pay for it. I need to get a tin whistle person, player, whatever. If you don't have the funds to do that, or there's no one around, or it's going to cost too much or take too long or something, like, maybe consider giving a different character trait or something, or consider doing it differently. But you got to think about the logistics of, what do I have in my head? Can I actually create this? And that leads on to the next one, which is like, can I create this? If you're trying to make like a full dubstep album with some insane virtual riot kind of sound design, and you've never sound designed before, you're probably not going to be able to. It doesn't mean that you have to just stop and like not do it. You can still try, of course. We can incorporate the things, but if someone asks, I need a professional producer, and you go, yeah, man, I'll do it. Again, it's not going to help you by pretending that you can do it when you can't. That's not to say don't do something brand new. It's just to say, don't get yourself into a situation you can't get out of, I guess. And the third and final is, do you have time? Especially for working on projects for a game or a film or just some kind of project. They always have time limits. Do not expect to write 150 tracks that are each like 6 minutes long if you only have 1 week. It's obviously not going to happen. And I know that's a huge scale that I'm making, but it still works on that. I have to make 3 tracks in 1 day. Your quality is going to be so much worse. Try and find a way to make it work with the time that you have. That was Composer Answers Composing Questions, and some questions on compositing. So I hope you enjoyed. I hope you learned something, and see you next video.